قناة فلذاتنا.
سبحانك ربي يا رحمن، يا من كرمت بني الإنسان، وجعلت الأسرة تجمعنا وتقينا من لفح الحرمان. إن قام الأب بتربية للروح وأيضا للأبدان، وزرع الخير بأبناء وأسس ذياك البنيان، فسيحصد من ذلك خيرا وسيهزم أجناد الشيطان، ويؤسس بيتا للتقوى ويؤيد من رب منان، ويعامل زوجا بالحسنى ويعمر بيتا بالإحسان.
قناة فلذاتنا.
ويحفظ للأخت محبة، فالأخت كأنفاس الريحان، ويشد بكف لأخيه كي يقفا في وجه الطوفان. أسرتنا يا نعمة ربي، يا وردا أزهر في البستان، يا قارب خير يحمينا إن عصفت أمواج الخلجان. إن عاشت أسرتنا بشرع سنكون معا في بر أمان، سنكون معا في بر أمان.
قناة فلذاتنا.
So this particular strategy is the 6 thinking hats. This is a strategy that was really developed by a philosopher, Edward de Bono, in the mid-80s. And it's a specific process where we put on different kinds of hats that symbolize different kinds of thinking. So let me introduce you to the 6 hats and the thinking that's behind those hats, and then we'll think about how we might apply these in our classrooms to our learners. I'll start with the green hat. The green hat represents creativity. This is the one that we want to put on when we want to think about possibilities, when we want to think about alternatives and new ideas. This hat really gives us the opportunity to practice thinking forward and thinking about multiple pathways that exist in the decision or problem that we're exploring. The yellow hat is the symbol of thinking optimistically, or finding the bright side, the positives or the benefits in a particular issue. Under this hat, we can really explore the value that exists in particular pathways for our thinking. And of course, if we have the bright side, we need to have that dark devil's advocate hat, if you will. So the black hat represents judgment, and it asks us to start exploring why something might not work. What are the difficulties or the dangers that are present? And this is the hat that a lot of people believe really brings strength to the decisions that we make or the way that we solve problems, because it allows us to consider those things that might be potential barriers or roadblocks, and we can proactively go ahead and try to sweep those out of the way. The white hat is all about logic. It's all about facts, just the facts. It calls for us to examine both what we know and don't know, and then think about whether or not we need to fill that knowledge gap, or whether or not we just need to acknowledge that it's something that we don't know. And then the red hat, if I had to be honest here, this is probably the hat that I fall into the kinds of thinking most often. This is the emotional lens. This is where we really process our feelings, our hunches, our intuitions. This is the hat that I'd call your gut hat. What's your gut telling you? And when using this hat, you can really start to dig into some of those pieces that impact you in the affective way, and consider the emotions that it might cause in other people. So let's think about why we might introduce our students to these hats and how we might have them wear these metaphorical hats, if you will. I got a couple ideas about moving into application-based for the classroom. And of course, depending on what level you teach, K-12, your students may require different levels of scaffolding for this particular activity. And of course, our younger students are going to require even more explicit scaffolding than I might describe in this lesson. So feel free to refer back to our learning targets and success criteria, where you're just getting introduced to this idea, and then you're making decisions for how it might fit into your particular teaching context with your students. So let's start with an idea around a problem scenario. So if you were to pose a particular problem to your students, one thing that you might have them do as they creatively solve this problem is to apply the 6 hats to the problem and consider all the different angles that might be present as a pathway through those particular thinking pieces. If you wanted to make this even more collaborative in terms of providing a role that students might play, then you might assign individual students to a particular hat and have them contribute to the group through the lens of that particular hat. Another way that we might consider having our students explore this 6 hats idea is through considering past or future decisions, weighing the decision that they already made through those hats. Did they consider all those as pathways before they made the decision? And if they didn't, what are the ones that they could have considered? And maybe what would the impact have been if they had considered the decision through different lenses? So it's a way to evaluate the soundness of the decision that we've already made. But if we're thinking about a future decision, it's a way to proactively consider all the different pathways and lenses through which we can gather information and thinking to inform the direction that we decide to move. If we're thinking about a particular content area, I could see this fitting well with social studies and really digging into historical events and thinking about whatever the historical event is and the players that were involved, what hats did they seem to be wearing when they made those decisions that caused the events to happen. And perhaps consider how the history might have changed if someone had worn a different hat, or if we look at the lens of history through those different lenses, what might we discover? In the English language arts classroom, I was thinking along the lines of analyzing text through the different hats, and particularly plot details and character development and character decisions. What does it seem to be that character or that plot point is based on? Which of these kinds of thinking? And then, of course, again, that divergent thinking where we might think, how might the plot or the character have been different if we had applied a different hat? One of my favorite ways to use the 7 hats is to really use it as a reflection and a processing tool. And to do this, you really have to apply the hats in a particular order. I like to think about when I'm working in the field with teachers all over the United States, and I finish a workshop. Sometimes it's been really powerful. Sometimes things fall flat. And as a continuous learner, one thing that I like to do is to think about, well, what happened and where did things fall down and what can I improve as a teacher? So where I like to start with that reflection or processing piece is with the red hat. Let me just tap in first to what am I feeling? How am I feeling right now based on how the day went? How was I feeling at different points in the day? How did the teachers and leaders that I was working with during the day, how did they feel? And what did that really cause to happen? So I put that white hat on and just think about the facts. What happened today, and what did I do, and what did the people that I worked with do, with no judgments? And then I like to think about that yellow hat. Let's go to the positivity and the bright side. And this is really important on those days where I'm struggling to find the positivity or struggling to find what went well. When I'm too self-critical, I have to force myself to put this yellow hat on and find those silver linings. What went well? Let me name those first so that I can pave the path for me to really dig deeply and think about this black hat. What did not go well? Where did I have challenges? Where were my roadblocks? What were the things that could have gone better? And then it's all about that creativity piece where we jump back in and start to think about what could I have changed or done differently. This is where I start to action step and think about a pathway forward for changing the outcome that I had. Now, there's an additional hat. I did not introduce this one just a minute ago. I wanted to save it for here. The blue hat is really the hat that the person who's facilitating this kind of thinking process, because originally this was set up to be a group activity where different people in the group assumed different kinds of thinking so that we could consider all the angles of the problem. The blue hat is really that process step. Typically, the facilitator of the group wears this hat and makes sure that everybody is engaging in the kind of thinking that they're supposed to be thinking, and they really moderate the process. But when I'm using this with students or with myself, I really like to think of the blue hat as the metacognitive piece. It's an opportunity for us to think about the thinking and the process that we're using. Is it working for us? And so in the reflection activity, what I like to do is to put this hat on at the end when I am thinking through those different hats and say, okay, how'd it go? Were there any hats that I really struggled with today? Is there a place that I need to think about reaching out to somebody else and processing with?